This image of mass destruction has dominated the world for almost half a century. We now face the challenge of global climatic change caused by 200 years of industrial activity. We must unite to face the threat of a possible global ecological catastrophe. Throughout the centuries, mankind has built himself empires and nation-states. And now, as the millennium draws to a close, we have developed weapons which are capable of destroying the planet in minutes. Now the nation-state faces a fundamental challenge from climate change, as industrial man's pollution of the atmosphere threatens to alter irrevocably the face of nature and our common future.
If current models prove generally accurate, the climate change resulting from these historic emissions will take us outside the range of anything that has been experienced in the period of written human history. That is, not to say that human beings can't survive them, but rather that we'll have no cultural or written record to go back to and ask, what did folks do last time? What worked? What didn't work? What made things worse? What made them better?
Now, there are skeptics who say that, the whole thing is being exaggerated and there is no conclusive evidence. Well, I'm afraid if we wait till conclusive evidence comes along, the form of that evidence will be so expensive in terms of the effect on life on this planet that we will be able to do nothing about it at that point of time. So we really have to strike the problem at its root, and we have to strike at it immediately.
And at the root of climate change is the greenhouse effect.
As we look out over the cloud tops, we can't see the greenhouse effect. It's invisible, but it's there nevertheless. The temperature of the planet's surface is some 30 degrees warmer than it would be if there weren't greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide and water vapor in the atmosphere. Heat and light from the sun is passing down through the atmosphere. Some of it's being reflected by cloud tops, scattered by dust particles, or absorbed by the gases of the atmosphere. But about half is reaching the Earth's surface, warming the land and the ocean. And the Earth's surface is emitting energy, radiation, back into space at longer wavelengths. Now, the greenhouse gases let the energy from the sun pass down through the atmosphere relatively unhindered, but they trap the terrestrial radiation before it can escape to space. So more greenhouse gases in the lower atmosphere means an enhanced heat trap, and the surface of the planet will warm up, causing a substantial change in climate.
Many scientists agree the climate is changing, but there's still a great deal of uncertainty.
What's at odds is whether humans are adding to the gases in the atmosphere fast enough to radically alter the climate on a much, much faster rate than nature does. That's the debate, because that rate of change, that 5 degrees or so warming that we're talking about in the next 50 or so years, is about the same degree of warming that it took to bring the Ice Age to the present climate. And it took nature about 10,000 years to melt the ice caps, to raise the sea level 120 meters, to completely revamp the ecological face of the planet. And it does that in 5 to 10,000 years. We're doing a change just as large on the time frame of a century. And that's what has me, ecologists and other people, worried about the greenhouse effect from people.
The Earth's temperature has been steadily and rapidly rising over the last 100 years. And the 1980s have seen the 5 warmest years on record. This is a computer model prediction based on research at the Goddard Space Institute in New York. Although the average temperature rise will be between 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, at the poles, it could rise by as much as 12 degrees over the next 40 years. But are people convinced by these predictions?
I hate to be cynical, but the best way to get the attention of the public and the politicians is not through scientists going out there and telling them what a good case in physics it is and how unprecedentedly rapid climate change is and that this is 10 to 100 times faster than the recovery from the ice age, all of which is true. That's not emotionally tangible to most constituents. In Missouri, it says on the license plate, "Show me." And show me is a good philosophy. The problem is, what can we show people other than theories and models and so forth? Well, we can show them what's happened in the weather in the last few years. And there have been a lot of extremes. In the US, there was dramatic heat, and there were fires, and there was drought. And what this did is make emotionally tangible the fact that that kind of weather could happen with increasing frequency in the future.
The public has looked out its window for the last 2 years, seen a series of episodes of big storms and droughts, of floods and unusual rain episodes, and begun to recognize that something is wrong about the weather. International politicians are beginning to recognize that climate change may fundamentally alter the environment in which we have to make political decisions.
With the pollution that's already in the atmosphere, we're committed to further warming of 1, possibly 2 degrees Celsius. Moreover, it's going to take us quite some time to implement the measures needed to control releases of the greenhouse gases in order to adapt to the changing climate. So we can't afford to wait. We're already at the threshold. Global temperature is higher than it's been since records began. And any further warming is going to push us into uncharted territory, and that's when the first substantial impacts are going to occur. This is not a problem that we can wait 30 or 40 years to deal with. Really, the time for action is now.
But if we are to act effectively, we have to understand the problem we've created. The Earth's atmosphere is proportionately the same thickness as the skin on our bodies. Without it, we would either roast or freeze to death, yet we continually abuse it.
We tend to regard the atmosphere as a limitless resource, continually renewing itself, cleansing itself of pollution. This is no longer the case. We're injecting pollutants into the atmosphere at an ever-increasing rate. 5,500 million tons of carbon go into the atmosphere every year as a result of the burning of fossil fuel, coal, gas, and oil. Many of these pollutants have a long lifetime. The chlorofluorocarbons, for example, that we're releasing today will still be there in the atmosphere in 100, 150 years' time. And so we have to look on the atmosphere now in a rather different fashion. We have to manage it, and we have to manage it effectively.
Most of the greenhouse gases can be found anywhere from the Earth's surface up to between 10 to 15 kilometers high. We actually need this protective blanket, but we've been adding too many gases to it, and the world is gradually warming up. That 5,500 million tons of carbon dioxide we produce every year weighs about the same as 13.5 million fully laden jumbo jets. Other gases from fossil fuel burning and fertilizers add to the problem. Methane gas, produced by the vast herds of grazing cattle and millions of acres of rice paddies, floats up to join the greenhouse cloud. And then there are the chlorofluorocarbons, the CFCs we know as destroyers of the ozone layer. For over 10 years, scientists have monitored their effect as the ozone hole expands year by year, particularly over the Antarctic. But as greenhouse gases, CFCs are 10,000 times more powerful than carbon dioxide, and so they too are adding to the global warming. Our forests are the Earth's refrigerators. They absorb carbon dioxide and help to cool the planet. Yet year by year, we destroy 10 times more forest than we replant. In 1987 alone, an area of Amazonian forest the size of England, Wales and Scotland was destroyed forever. If we continue destroying rainforests and their vital resources, the chances are that they will all have disappeared by the year 2010. We've turned an ally into an enemy, as forest burning now adds 15% of carbon dioxide to the band of greenhouse gases. Now every one of these causes is contributing to a global pattern of climatic change. If in the next 40 years the world warms by between 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, global sea level could rise up to 1 meter, possibly even higher. In fact, sea level has already risen the world over by 10 to 15 centimeters this century. That sounds little enough, but low-lying coasts and islands like the Maldives are already at risk. More than 3/4 of the world's population live on or near the coast. In Egypt, the Nile Delta supports 16 million people, and the coastline is already retreating. A sea level rise of 1.5 to 2 meters would devastate lives and land, and sea defenses would cost many billions of dollars. If sea levels rose some 2 meters higher, even the experts at flood defenses might have to admit defeat. If the Antarctic ice sheet begins to melt, our great-great-grandchildren could inherit not the land, but the sea. London wouldn't escape. If levels rose to over 5 meters, this could become the only underwater flood barrier in the world. Millions of Londoners would have to pack their bags and leave. Seen from space, Florida is already a watery world, and some of their most important wetland habitats, like the Everglades and the Okefenokee swamps, could vanish forever. If the world continues to warm, half the state of Florida could disappear beneath the waves. All this may sound like science fiction, but the oceans are powerful, and combined with the forces of flood and storm, even a small sea level rise could be devastating.
It's miserable out there. No water, no sewage, no food, nothing.
Maybe the industrial world could cope with massive flooding at an enormous cost, but the cost to developing countries would be incalculable in terms of lives, economies, and political stability. For years, Bangladesh has endured floods, storms, and tidal surges, but with a future sea level rise, 10 million people might eventually have to leave. In February 1988, the village of Tetlhara experienced one of the country's worst floods. Mohammed Mian has a family of 10 and farms 3 acres of land.
আগের বন্যা তো কোনো ক্ষয়ক্ষতি হয় না, অল্প কিছু ক্ষয়ক্ষতি হয়েছে স্যার। এই বন্যার মতো বন্যা আমি আর জীবনে দেখিনি। এই বন্যা দিনে দিন হাতকে হাত বাড়ছে, কোনো জিনিস সারা পারি নাই, কোনো একটা ধান ক্ষেত কাটা পারি নাই, কোনো একটা পাট ক্ষেত কাটা পারি নাই। এইরকম বন্যা, পানি বাড়ির মধ্যে বুক পানি হয়েছিল, গলা পানি হয়েছিল, ঘরের ভিটার মধ্যে থাকতে পারি নাই, গরু বছর সব এই রুটে লয়ে গেলাম। তারপরে যখন দেখলাম যে পানি আরও বৃদ্ধি পাওয়া ধরলো, তখন এই বিভিন্ন দেশে টান জেগে নিয়ে এই যে ছেলেপেলে পাঠায় দেওয়া হইল। তো এইরকম বন্যা যদি এই দেশে হয় তাহলে কী করে বাঁচা যাবে? আর নিজেই যদি কোনো গাছগাছালিতে বাঁচছে, তাহলে গরু যদি না থাকে তো আমার কৃষকের কী করে আমরা চাষবাস করব? কী করে বাঁচলেই কি না বাঁচলেই কি? ছেলেপেলে কী করে বাঁচাইব?
While farmer Mian recalls the worst floods in his lifetime, ironically, throughout the 1980s, other parts of the world have suffered an increasing drought. These all too familiar images capture the stress and impoverishment of millions caught in the poverty cycle, a cycle compounded by drought. Parts of Eritrea have already experienced 10 successive years of little or no rain. Although there are many causes for this deprivation other than climate change, global warming can only make things worse. Every year, around the world, an area the size of Belgium becomes a desert. Existing drought-prone areas could expand north and south as rainfall patterns change in the next 40 years, making drought even more frequent and widespread. And we, the industrial countries that have largely triggered the climate change, will continue to hand out aid to the poorest countries. And where will this food come from? Probably from America, the largest grain exporter in the world. But with climate change, American crop belts could move north and grain yields reduce by almost 17% in the next 40 years. A foretaste of things to come sent American farmers, businessmen and politicians running scared in the summer of 1988. At the Chicago Board of Trade, markets went wild as the summer drought gripped America's food-growing heartlands, evoking powerful memories of the Dust Bowls and wastelands of the 1930s.
Year in, year out, uncomplaining, they fought the worst drought in history. Their stock choked to death on the barren land. Their homes were nightmares of swirling dust, night and day. Many went ahead of them, but many stayed, until stock, machinery, homes, credit, food, and even hope were gone.
It's been a long, hot summer. Our summer started about a month early this year, where our temperatures in the first part of June were well over 100. We had 8 days out of 11, in fact, that were over 100 degrees. We've had some people put out some thermometers, and at 4 inches below the surface, the temperature was 104 degrees. And at the surface, there was temperatures were at 139 to 140. As you can see, the wheat here is barely ankle high. We did come in with the combines and try to harvest it. We did make a few passes, but we just had to give it up because there was just nothing there to harvest.
This period here in April of 1988 represents the beginning of really great concerns in the market regarding the weather.
The wheat just really looks terrible. There's the worst I've ever had in my 25 years of farming.
It was the longest drought in history, I believe, in terms of not only the severity of it, in terms of lack of moisture, but also in terms of the duration of it. There were probably as many as 6 months in a row that we received below normal precipitation throughout the main growing regions of the United States.
I'm very vulnerable to the weather. All this technology does us no good if the weather doesn't cooperate.
Any shift out of the heartland that we have here, the Maine, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, central Corn Belt region, that has been for years looked at as, along with the steppes of the Soviet Union, the best producing land in the world. It would have a very strong impact on the economy in general.
Not only for their economy, for if America's crops fail, the world's food safety net fails with them.
We have a world of over 5 billion people, with people tightly locked into national boundaries. Migration is not as easy as it used to be. You can't move away from a bad climate to a good one anymore. And we have maybe a half a billion to as much as a billion living at nutritional margins. These are very difficult problems with or without climate change. If you add rapidly changing climate, this puts another stress right on top of an already stressed world struggling for economic development.
የዝናቡ ሁኔታ እንዴት ነበር ባለፈው አመት?
ባለፈው አመት በቀን አንድ ቀን እንደው ካፌ አረጨት አድርጎ ነው ዝም ብሎ ይሄደ እንጂ ዝናብ እኮ የለም።
Last year there was no rain. We had no rain at all.
ምንም እናደርጋለን? ምንም እናደርገው የለን። አምና ድርቅ ነው። በፊት ነው ስናገኝ ነበር።
Well, some days you really wonder what you're doing, because maybe you did a good job of marketing. You probably got the seed in the ground at the right time. Everything started out fantastic. And all of a sudden the temperatures warm up. We get a summer hits us about a month early, and the rainfall stops. You can really fall into some depression if you let it happen because of the things that you have no control over.
We can't control the weather, but we can control those forces that are changing our climate. Perhaps we need to think more carefully about how we use the land and its resources.
We are the ones that can voice, like the voice of the land. We can voice our concerns that you're killing the land, your uses, your style of use is killing the land, and we need to teach you, like we've got to lock you into something for a while and humanize you so that you can understand that you just can't do this to the land. Then we'll let you out of the cage and you're not going to kill us anymore.
Bear Island, Lake Timogame, Ontario. The Timiagama Anishinaabe Indians claim 4,000 square miles of this lake and forest territory as their ancestral motherland. Their tribe has managed the forest lands for 6,000 years, but now they have to fight an invasion of Canadian logging companies who threaten to destroy their environment and their lifestyle. Gary Potts has convened a tribal council to ask questions about who really controls the environment in which they live. Questions we should all be asking in the light of climate change.
If you fly high enough, you'll see great beauty. A lot of little lakes, hills. You get down closer to the land, you'll see scars. You get down a little closer, then you see that what's happened is that the forest has been taken away. And with the forest being taken away, all of the life that lived in that forest is gone too.
It's ironic, actually, that we're here talking about the deforestation problem, because this is Canada, and you usually associate the deforestation problem with the third world. But in this country, we plant 3 trees for every 10 that we cut down, and that's compared to planting something like 1 tree in the third world for every 10 trees that are cut down. So we don't really have a very good record in this country either.
We've treated the white man like a season, and now we're finally understanding that this season is almost like an attack of locusts on our lands. It's just eating everything, and then it's going to move on.
It's very easy to sit in Toronto or Washington or whatever capital city and make a decision to flood somebody else's river valley for a hydro dam or raise someone else's forests because you want to sell the logs. That decision is just too easy. But when the people who have to live with the consequences of a decision actually make it, we think we'll end up with much better decisions, not only locally, but for the global environment as well.
What the industrial society needs to come to terms with is its own objectives. What are your objectives, industrial society? Are you going to perpetuate this lifestyle for 6,000 years? What is the lifetime of your lifestyle? What is the lifetime of your lifestyle? What is the lifetime of your lifestyle? What is the lifetime of your lifestyle?
The main responsibility for the problem lies with the industrialized world. There's no doubt about that. It's the pollution that we've caused on the road to development over the past couple of centuries that's changed the composition of the atmosphere. But in the future, the third world are going to play a very important role as well. And it's particularly important that third world nations consider whether they're going to adopt the role of development, the model of development that we've pioneered in the north with its waste, its overconsumption, its inefficient use of resources, or whether they are going to consider an alternative model of development which builds in concern for the environment. That really is a critical issue as far as the third world's concerned at present.
1/5 of the world's population lives in China. Not only would these 1,000 million people become the victims of global climate change, but as the largest potential consumer society on Earth, they could unwittingly make the problem even worse. India and other newly industrializing countries are waiting to join them, eager to adopt the material lifestyles enjoyed by the industrialized countries for the past century or so. And who are we to stop them?
In the developing countries, you cannot dampen the expectations of the people who are entitled to at least a basic minimum level of development. I don't think we can ever reach the levels of affluence that exist in the developed countries, and I don't think we should. But you have to have major inputs of capital, major inputs of technology and consumption of energy to bring about even a basic living standard.
Economic development is always a priority issue of our country. People would like to richer. They would like to raise their living standard. So they have to develop their economy. But economic development always brings some pollution to environment. And that's a difficult problem for us. So, as I think, we have to protect our environment, but we have to develop our economy as well.
At the heart of economic development is the demand for energy, and that demand is fueled by coal.
Our dominant form of energy is coal because it's produced entirely within the country. We're consuming something like 200 million tons annually, and this is likely to grow to something like 400 million tons or more by the turn of the century. Given the fact that coal is the major indigenous form of commercial energy in India, we have no choice but to continue a heavy reliance on this form of energy.
The Chinese demand for energy is growing year by year, and they too have no other real option than to use their huge reserves of coal. In 1989, China used 960 million tons of it, and in 10 years' time, this will rise to nearly 1.5 billion. China is already in 4th position in the World League of Carbon Dioxide Polluters, and in the not-too-distant future, she, together with the developing countries, could rapidly overtake the industrialized world. As more people join the consumer queues, so the products they demand will worsen an already worsening situation. And what would all this mean? Millions more cars, more CO2. Millions more fridges, more CFCs. Millions more mouths to feed, more rice paddies, more cattle, more methane. Hundreds of new power plants and factories, all adding to an ever-increasing greenhouse cloud.
We can't simply ask India and China and other countries in the world to stop developing because it's going to pollute us, thank you very much. They're going to say, you did that for 200 years, now it's our turn. And we'll say, but you have so many people that you can't do it the same way we're doing it. And they'll say, then you better help us out of it. Now, it isn't going to work without a law of the atmosphere where everybody has to give up something in order to gain global environmental security.
There's no doubt the most encouraging development over the past few years has been the Montreal Protocol on protection of the ozone layer, control of chlorofluorocarbons and the other gases which deplete ozone in the upper atmosphere. That really was a major landmark. It was the first international agreement to curb global pollution, and it certainly sets a precedent for control of the other greenhouse gases.
The acknowledged father of the Montreal Protocol is Dr. Mustafa Tolba.
The minute we start looking into how are going to have the solutions, then we move entirely from environment into trade, politics, economics, international relations, absolutely nothing to do with the environment. And that is where I see the policy responses as the most important element which require the international cooperation.
We believe that sustainable growth and environmental protection are compatible, and the interaction between man's activities and the global environment is such that if we are to pass on the heritage safe for our children's future, we must take action now.
Ce sera certainement une des données que vous remarquerez, mesdames et messieurs, l'importance donnée à l'environnement par ce 15e sommet. La technologie doit représenter, ainsi que les transferts de technologie, un élément essentiel de notre coopération internationale.
В то же время рост мировой экономики обнажает противоречия и пределы индустриализации традиционного типа. Дальнейшее ее распространение вширь и вглубь толкает к экологической катастрофе.
The public knows that politicians like Mrs. Thatcher, but of other political stripes as well, Mr. Gorbachev, Mr. Bush, are now saying these words. Perhaps understandably, they're a bit wary. What they're waiting to see, given their past record, is whether they're really going to put their money where their mouths now are.
It is significant that leaders in the West are taking the issue seriously, but whether the political rhetoric translates into action concerns not only people in the Western world, but policymakers in the developing countries as well.
Environmental problem has now become both a source of international conflict and also a reason for international cooperation. I would like to see that the industrialized countries take a more active initiative in the solution of the environmental problems.
I think if there has to be a partnership, it has to be in both directions. And therefore, I'd like to say the developing countries must show their solidarity with this global cause. But at the same time, we shouldn't be at the receiving end of the stick. And therefore, there must be an investment in transfer of technologies by the developed countries to the developing countries. And that's where I think India can take a leadership position. The West doesn't quite understand the problems of the developing countries, and they also don't regard them as terribly serious because, you know, it's something which is so far away and remote from the developed world. Now, I personally think that if you don't have effective leadership, then you probably cannot bring about changes in attitudes. One example I want to quote is that of President Bush and his campaign slogan, read my lips, no new taxes. Now, if somebody gets elected to the highest office in the most powerful country in the world with that kind of campaign promise and campaign rhetoric, it's going to be very difficult for him to tell the American people that they need to make enormous sacrifices.
Well, I try to tell my kids to shut their lights off and not to waste energy as much as we possibly can. Whether the message is getting home to the kids is going to depend on a combination of hearing it at home, hearing it in school, and hearing something about it on TV and the radio about people wanting to do it.
And that's the big question, wanting to solve the problem, because it affects our lifestyle. And our lifestyles are wrecking the world. So what can we do? We can use less heat. We can switch off the lights. We can use our cars less often, or not at all. We could plant more trees than we cut down. We can stop using CFCs, but above all, we must start saving energy. For in the short term, energy saving is the real key to easing climate change. The West must lead, but it is a vital issue in the developing world as well.
In Brazil, for example, a recent World Bank study indicated that an investment of about $2 billion in energy efficiency improving devices would replace an investment in energy supply capacity worth about $44 billion. Nonetheless, the bank continues to invest about 99% of its energy sector loans in increasing energy supply rather than improving energy efficiency, improving energy efficiency, improving energy efficiency.
When one country is getting poorer and one getting richer, that kind of stress often leads to war or terrorism or other kinds of conflict. If climate change adds to that, it only is going to be worse. So if we can make development and to make sure it's environmentally sustainable, that it's energy efficient, that it can be held in the long run, that it can raise standards of living, get population growth rates down, and we can get that as a top priority, and it takes the threat of unprecedented climate change to do that, well, let's take that threat and solve two problems at once, environment and development, and I think we can do it, and that's the good side of the greenhouse effect, and the fear of warming may very well have a very nice silver lining inside of this greenhouse cloud.
Climate change is an issue which is about a lot more than the weather. It touches everything, political, economic, social, about the way we now live, and it faces us all with choices. Politicians have got to make choices. They're talking green. We now need institutions that have got teeth. We need to adapt the ones we have. We need to invent, as appropriate, new ones. As individuals, we've got to take positive actions to use the power of knowledge and the power of the purse in the marketplace in order to take steps which move away from the brink rather than towards it. Those would be positive ways to respond to this crisis. But we could choose to do nothing. We could say, for example, that this is an issue where there isn't yet sufficient scientific evidence. If we do that, then this issue could well become too hot to handle, because that is a very positive decision in another way, more damaging than almost any other. It means that we're going to choose to let the experiment continue, and if we do, the danger is that it passes the point of no return. We're used to thinking of military power as being decisive. It is the product of nation states. And yet here we confront, in the global climatic crisis, problems which no nation state, be it the most powerful militarily in the world, is competent to solve. But I suspect, nonetheless, that before we produce a global political commitment to act collectively to resolve these issues, we are going to go through the Vale of Tears. We are going to face conflicts over resources, perhaps, and there may well be a military dimension to those.
If Brazil cuts down its rainforests as part of its overdevelopment, and the end result is that it changes the atmosphere on the entire planet, then we're going to have to think, can we control Brazil? Can we tell Brazil what to do? Can we stop them from doing something that they're going to say, wait a minute, this is Brazil, we can do what we want to do. You can't tell us what to do. And all of a sudden, are we going to have to call upon international institutions, including military institutions, to say, sorry, Brazil can't cut down its rainforests, and you have to go make sure that it can. It seems to me that those kinds of questions are now beginning to be seen as transnational questions, and before, there was this notion that what you did within the confines of your own border was under your own control.
A lot of very worrying things are coming together.
The first is the unrestrained proliferation of our animal species, the human race. We've risen from something like 2 billion people to probably 6 by the end of the century. The second is the way in which we are changing the environment, by which I mean using up resources, causing desertification, polluting our atmosphere, polluting the sea. And on top of that is something coming quite new, which is the possibility of climate change. Now, all these things come together because if the human race continues to grow at its present rate, a lot of people are going to be very badly hurt, and a lot of people are going to lose their lives. For example, the number of human refugees is already increasing at a very high rate. It's more than doubled in the last 10 years. It could double again if we include environmental refugees, people who are fleeing away not because of civil war, but because their livelihoods are threatened by change. And that is a problem which the world is going to have to face.
Years from now, there are going to be a lot of people wanting to emigrate from the third world because they don't have food or because they don't have the standards of living that are available in the north. So what do? Do we insulate ourselves from that? Do we create a hermetically sealed first world against the rest of the world? Do we have north-south resource conflicts over questions of food or questions of other resources? Do certain parts of the ocean become available for some people and not for other people? I mean, these are all questions that, as you can see from the very way in which I frame them, have a kind of military sound to them. They have a kind of military thinking behind them.
We have to change our concept of security from the fact that security is to establish a military power to be able to push back any army that's coming and invading you. And I'm giving a concrete example of my own country, again, Egypt. And I said that we are living from the river. And if some country upstream puts a dam which prevents the water, and I take a concrete example, say Ethiopia, for example, and they have the full right to do this. They put a dam on the Blue Nile, which brings in almost 80% of the water of the Nile down to Egypt. And they put a dam there, and we don't get water. Do you believe that 50 million or 52 million people are going to sit back and wait, seeing themselves dying because of no water? Or are they going to take up arms and go and defend their right to live? Where is the invading army in this? It is a shared natural resource, and unless we secure that our shared resources are managed in a cooperative way, we are likely to initiate a new set of ecological problems which could be the source of conflicts in the world, rather than what we are talking about of environment being the unifying factor because it touches on you and me and the third and the fourth.
I believe that the effects of climatic change were once described as rather similar to that of a nuclear war. Well, no one wants anything like that. The critical point is that the human species is part of the intricate web of nature. We're an animal like other animals. We ought to respect the earth, which is the one we inherited, and yet, in many ways, we are abusing it as no earlier generation has ever done. There is an old Kashmiri proverb, which I'm happy always to quote, is that we did not inherit the earth, we bequeath it to our children.